Welcome back. Let's return now to the diplomatic row between the British and Greek governments over the Elgin Marbles. So how did they end up in the British Museum? Well, as ever, the man with the answers, Professor Michael Clarke, who joins me now on set. Michael, there's so many questions here. So first and foremost, how did they even come to Britain?
The story starts in 1687, when the Parthenon was complete. Had the roof on, all the pillars, everything. And during the one of the many Venetian Ottoman wars, the Ottomans were using it as an arsenal. They were storing ammunition there, and some cretin of a Venetian artillery officer took a pot shot at it and blew it up. And that's what we see now. That's what was left after this most beautiful building ever created, most elegant architectural structure ever created by mankind, was blown to that state that it's in now. And that disaster in 1687 scattered everything, and from then on people were stealing it, including the Venetians, and so people were taking lots of pieces of it, and it was deteriorating because the Turks didn't care one way or another what happened to it. Lord Elgin goes out as British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire in 1801, determined to save the Elgin Marbles and lots of other things from the Erechtheum and the Temple of Athene Nike. He wanted some of these things. Now, it was selfish. He wanted them for himself because he wanted to create his own museum. He spent about, in modern terms, about 5 million of his own money. He got permission from the Ottoman authorities, who really didn't mind, to do this, so it was legal in terms of what was there at that time. And he brought them back to Britain at his own expense.
So he did buy them, in that sense, from the government of the day?
Yeah, he didn't pay them anything, as far as I know. He paid for the removal, and he paid all the costs, which were considerable, and he had permission to do so. And he consulted other people. He consulted Canova, the great architect at the time, to see how he could best help and preserve them. He said, look, I'm going to preserve these things for posterity, but also because I want the museum, I want my own museum of them.
Obviously, then they ultimately went to the British Museum. So he sold them to the British government?
Well, in 1816, he had a very expensive divorce to finance, and so he sold them to the British government, who conducted an inquiry in 1816 into the legality of his deal with the Ottoman authorities and declared that it was fine. And then they put them in the British Museum. So they ended up in the British Museum because of his very expensive divorce from Lady Elgin.
And that was 1816?
Yep.
And so the Greek government, of course, today, we know their position, but the evolution of Greece itself, the establishment of Greece itself, is critical to all of this.
There was, the Greek War of Independence starts in 1821, goes to 1829. 1832, Greece becomes a state, a modern state. From the very beginning, within 2 or 3 years, they were asking politely, could we have them back? They were asking again, the ambassadors were asking in 1890, 1910. The Greeks didn't lodge a formal request until 1984, when they lodged a request with UNESCO to say this is a site that we want. Now, one of the things that the British Museum was saying, and all until that time, was, look, if we give these back, they will deteriorate because you can't keep them, which is true. You know, when I first started my pilgrimages to Athens in the 1970s, you wouldn't believe how bad the museums were at the time. And I mean, this is still from 1948, when the Elgin Marbles were being brought back into the British Museum. They'd been stored during the war in, I think it was caves in South Wales. They'd been taken away for safekeeping during the war. They'd been brought back to preserve them. So the museum's case was, look, we can look after them and you can't. But now the Greeks have got this wonderful, the Museum of Athens, the Acropolis Museum, with all mod cons. And these days, yes, they can store them. Yes, they can do as good a job as the British Museum does. So that argument now doesn't apply. But that argument has only been valid for about the last 10 or 15 years.
What's interesting, given this debate and given the history of the UK and previously the British Empire, so are there other artefacts or jewellery or diamonds that would be even more controversial, where the argument for us to return them is much stronger?
Could be.
Because we'd stolen them outright from...
Yeah, the Nigerian bronzes, the West African bronzes, they should be called, are a case of them being stolen. One of the great ones is the obelisk, Cleopatra's Needle on the Thames. I mean, that's 4,000 years old. It goes back to before Ramses II. And that was gifted to Britain by the Khedive of Egypt in 1819 in gratitude for Britain's victories that helped establish Egypt.
So my question just on that is would this handing these back set a terrible precedent for the UK, perhaps even museums globally, that suddenly a swathe of artefacts would have to be returned to all sorts of places?
Not just in British cases. I mean, museums in Berlin, museums in Madrid. Because the Elgin Marbles are so symbolic of this argument about heritage, if Britain goes along with this, which it might, or if it can't find a deal for loan arrangements and replica arrangements, something like that, if it just gives the marbles back, then I think, yes, there'll be demands from all museums, particularly Western museums, to give back everything. And then the question is, well, where's the best place to look at heritage? Have you got to go to the place where it begins, or can you get the benefit of seeing it somewhere else? Those are big political arguments, of course.
I'm being told to wrap. I could keep this going for ages. I know you don't want to go into the politics of the meeting being cancelled, and you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but where do you ultimately conclude on this? Do you think they should be given back? Is there a strong argument for that, or do you think it's kind of legitimate?
I think in the era of modern technology, I think it's possible to create absolute replicas in every detail, and that gives us some scope for some middle process. I don't think you've got to say either they go back or they don't. I think you can arrange a system or make an arrangement whereby you can have as good as the thing either here or there. And people can see them and they can rotate. I mean, there's no reason why the Elgin Marbles can't go on a world tour. By Jove, that would be exciting.
Professor, as always, thank you so much for this knowledge and insight. And Prime Ministers Mitsotakis and Sunak, if you weren't watching, there is your solution.